Taken more than a decade, but within the next few hours, Malka Leifer will be back in Melbourne. The former school principal is facing 74 counts of child sex abuse against three sisters. Joining me now is Jeremy Leibler, who heads the Zionist Federation of Australia. Thanks for your time today, Jeremy.
Thanks for having me.
You campaigned for Malka Leifer to be extradited, but were there times you thought that this day would never come?
There certainly were times where we doubted whether or not we would see her arrive in Australia. But I think to describe how the Jewish community, the broader Australian community feel today would be an overwhelming sense of relief that she is now going to return and she will face justice and a fair trial for the crimes of which she's been accused.
What's your view about the way Israeli authorities handled, I think there was some 70 extradition requests?
Yes, well, there's been over 70 extradition hearings, which is obviously far too long, and the process taking over 7 years since Australia first requested her extradition is frankly completely unacceptable. We've been involved in this issue for some time. The real credit sits with the very brave three sisters, the survivors of Leifer's alleged abuse, who led this campaign incredibly bravely. The issue in Israel is that, while Israel is similar to Australia, its judiciary is separate from the government. However, Malka Leifer's defence team worked the system very hard, alleged that she was mentally unfit to be extradited to Australia. And it wasn't until there was an undercover investigation that demonstrated that she in fact was faking, and ultimately, thankfully, once Leifer's avenues for appeal were exhausted in Israel, the court deemed her fit to be extradited so she can face a trial in Australia.
Various Australian Prime Ministers have been involved in the process. Do you think government pressure, our government's pressure, was necessary for this extradition to happen?
I think that the government pressure, both from the Australian government, from the general Australian community. I met myself in November 2019 together with John Howard and other former politicians with Prime Minister Netanyahu. And in that meeting, he committed to us that once the court system had carried through its role, his government would not interfere and in fact would sign the extradition order so that she could return to Australia. And while it took way too long for the court process to ensue, we are very grateful that the political aspects of that process was actually completed very quickly.
And the court process here is due to start perhaps as early as tomorrow, certainly this week. The guilt or innocence of Malka Leifer is obviously up to the court to decide, but within the Jewish community of Melbourne, how difficult has this saga been?
This has been incredibly challenging for the Australian Jewish community. It was frankly never about her guilt or innocence, which, as you correctly say, will be determined by the court system in Victoria. This was about her extradition from Israel so that she could face the charges in Australia. It's been incredibly challenging, particularly for the victims of the alleged abuse, but also for all sexual abuse survivors who have had to endure this process. It's been very, very challenging. The main thing is that we have the right outcome and she is returning to Australia, although we look forward to the inquiries and the investigations that are currently taking place in Israel in relation to some of the delays taking their course. The former Deputy Health Minister, Yaakov Litzman, has been investigated, and the police have recommended the Attorney General indict him for unlawful, wrongful interference in the judicial process in Israel, and we look forward to that process taking its course in Israel.
A lot of court processes to play out both here and in Israel. Jeremy, thanks for your time today.